fantastic. I actually am moving into dung.
There you are.
I've just spent the last few months at the Bodleian looking at signs of use in various kinds of manuscripts, including in missals and pontificals and other service books, and manuscripts used in baptism ceremonies where there's lots of baby gunk rubbed into the margin. Indeed. So, and thank you, Amanda, and to the organizers. Now, I'm going to talk today about the reception of the Face of Christ, mostly in the Netherlands, and particularly by Philip the Good. And some of you will know this image very well, of Philip the Good praying in a church in which he has constructed this elaborate tent inside the church in order to put his own displays, to make them both private, but put them on display for his various courtiers who stand behind him. Philip always wearing black and kneeling at a prie-dieu with a diptych before him and a book in front of him. Am I audible?
Yes, but could you lower the lights?
And how do can I do that from here?
Yes.
Yeah. If you touch
Give
the
me a
touch
clue.
screen, there should be a light option.
Oh, got it. I can turn the music down. Oh, okay. Is that working?
Yes.
Now it is. It's starting.
Okay.
It's coming.
Okay. You wanted the full theater experience. Do you want popcorn too?
Yeah.
You feel good?
Not too much.
Okay, terrific. So Philip there with a diptych and a book in front of him, and one of his most famous and celebrated commissions was this diptych codex. And this is in Vienna, ONB 1800. And it's interesting because it has a diptych at the top of the binding that stays static while you're turning the pages down below. And it's just a short manuscript. But what's also interesting in terms of the reception of the Veronica and also Philip's intense desire to show his devotions very physically are the flyleaves of ONB 1800, which have 27 impressions of round objects that are hard metal objects that have been stitched in. And he began with the back of the book and then filled that whole page up and continued at the front of the book. And you can see that he's laying out round objects quite systematically. And a lot of times these have been called pilgrim's badges in the past. And we're all familiar with pilgrim's badges. I'm just putting a range of them up from the Cunera site that Hanukkah, who's with us here in row 5, has curated in a really tremendous website called the Cunera website. But what I want to draw your attention to is the fact that pilgrim's badges come in all shapes. They're often in Gothic frames. They often show the attribute of a saint, of the shrine from which they come. But just notice that the offsets in this manuscript and in many manuscripts are actually round. And I posit that many of the round metal objects that are put into manuscripts are actually souvenirs of having taken the Eucharist. They're Eucharistic souvenirs, and they have different kinds of iconography, like the Lamb of God and the face of Christ. And I thank Hanukkah for helping me crunch data from the database, and also Aidan for helping me work out some of the ideas that went into an article on this topic. Now, people stitched these souvenirs of having taken the Eucharist into their books. This one has almost 40 of these round metal objects sewn into the back of it. And so I think that this is the kind of thing that Philip the Good was stitching in his prayer books. Now, in addition to owning ONB 1800, he also inherited his grandfather's enormous Book of Hours that his grandfather, Philip the Bold, had made in the 1370s. And Philip the Bold had used this manuscript really heavily. It has lots of his DNA rubbed all over it, I'm sure. And when his grandson eventually inherited it in 1450, he took the manuscript apart. he divided it into two halves, and he took the opportunity to add a lot of objects to it, including more parchment and round objects, round metal objects, and pilgrim's badges. And this is what Eamon, in his important work, is called devotional accretions, making the book grow out of these kinds of interests by the user. And so I'm showing you on the left an image from the original part of the manuscript from the 1370s, from Philip the Bold, and on the right, one of the folios that Philip the Good added to the book when he had it rebound in 1450. And you can see that both Philips have themselves represented. So Philip the Bold in the initial over there on the left, and Philip the Good having himself represented kneeling before an image of the Mass of St. Gregory. He's always there in black. So usually just actually incorporating new pieces of parchment. Another reason that he added more parchment to the book was to incorporate what must have been a significant collection of small postcards on parchment or parchment paintings that represented various saints. So he had an image, for example, of Saint Laudre, whose suffrage is there written on the left, and that would have been pasted onto this page that was provided just for that purpose. Now, he also went around his territories, visiting all the shrines, picking up pilgrimage badges, including this one of St. Eloy, and you see that this is a round badge that he then sewed onto that page that he commissioned just for that purpose. St. Eloy is one of my favorites. He's got my favorite miracle story of all time. Instead of shoeing the horse by laboriously bending over and getting the horse to pick up its foot and stuff, he just removes the entire leg from the horse, works on it, and then sticks the leg back on. So a man of efficiency. So many of the other items that he added to this book were images of the face of Christ. And so there were no fewer than 6 of these that he found space for, he integrated into the book. And I want to think about these. Now, this is sort of a tradition that's initiated already by Matthew Paris, and what Nigel was talking about yesterday, I think is one aspect of this is really interesting in these terms, which is that so many images of the face of Christ, even from the beginnings, are on loose pieces of parchment. The one in the Arundel manuscript is actually a bifolio, slightly smaller than the book block, that's been inserted into the front of the book, into a book with a non-co-originating date and time. So people making these objects in order to put into existing books, and they are sometimes copied later and then swept up into a new production. But it seems like this is the inroad that they make into the physical structure of the book as separate objects moving in. And these full-page images, 2 of them that Philip put into his book, one at the very beginning of the manuscript, which seems to be a later edition. It's not very worn. I'm going to talk more about the kinds of wear. And then this really large one with the Veronica with this wonderful headdress holding up the white veil, and plenty of room for the textual accompaniment at the bottom of the image. So these are so large that they become folios in the manuscript. But one thing that those images often don't show is the context of the image within the larger book. And sometimes this is easier to see with an amateur photo, like the one that I'm showing you here, that shows you just how this leaf fits into the book. And I've only recently, I'm very proud of this, I just bought a very expensive German micro caliper to measure the thickness of parchment. And it very easily shows parchment that's been added and parchment that's original. But in this case, you can see that this added parchment is so stiff that it wants to stick out of the book. And it's of a very different kind of feel. And that thick parchment also lends itself, I think, to other kinds of functions. Not necessarily destined to be put into a book, but could easily be used as a poster, hung on the wall, tacked on with a couple pieces of wax, and used as an independent object that has the sturdiness to live that outside a book. And these things are really becoming popular in the mid-15th century in the Netherlands, and they enter all kinds of manuscripts. I like this wonderful example. I like the shiny carved 3D effect of this particular example with the beginning, the incipit of the prayer around it, and the object then stuck into a manuscript book of Hours from about 1450 from probably Bruges, and these manuscripts made in modules so that they can easily be opened, expanded, and have more stuff added to them. So the manuscript structure anticipating the devotional accretions, as it were. Now, in addition to those two large sheets, Philip also found a page on which to add these 4 small sheets, which might fit as pages into an octavo-sized manuscript, but he's got a giant wonky manuscript, so he ends up stitching these into his book. And this is also becoming a thing in the Netherlands in the mid-15th century. And I show you this wonderful example where this person with very unsteady hand and some nice thick yarn has turned the stitching into a form of a border design, adding the Veronica to the end of the calendar where there's space. And then there's a very funny, this humorous take on that in a manuscript that was in the Rittman collection in Amsterdam, where the illuminator has shown an illusionistically depicted face of Christ pinned with little illusionistic pins to the bottom of the image. And these very, very kind of rough images, this Veronica made around 1500, and then shipped to England, where it was stitched into a manuscript, a much earlier manuscript from New York. So my point is that people collect these. Philip collected at least 6 of them and then stitched them into his book all at once. And again, an amateur photo of this opening, the kind of opening that you would never pay £54 to actually to order, but a snapshot of it shows that it's one continuous linen thread that is used to stitch all 4 of them, meaning that they were all added at once. So he had a big collection of them and put them in. Now, not only did he stitch them in all at once, but he left extra blank sheets immediately thereafter, as if anticipating that his collection would grow. So he is counting on acquiring some more of these small images of the face of Christ. Now, Philip spent considerable time with these images, assuming that he expanded the book in 1450. He didn't die until 1467. He might have spent 17 years, nearly daily, with these images. And seeing them fanned out like this just gives you an idea of the level of grime that he has added and ground into the pages. And I hypothesize that this is not due to inadvertent wear, to simply, where's my prop? Simply opening the book and holding it open, which normally just sullies the bottom corners of the book. But he's really getting dirt into the entire lower third of the page and right into the gutter itself. And this, I think, is caused by some kind of deliberate touching or possibly even kissing with the mouth, which, Nigel, I hope to convince you that kissing with the mouth and depositing facial oil and dirt and spittle and part of breakfast is part of the physicality of all this. And so here is another small Veronica that's on a parchment, and somebody has built a bifolium out of paper in order to house it, and then has written a prayer after the fact in order to form a kind of image, rubric, prayer, triad, so that it becomes a unit. And this is probably from a manuscript owned by a German nun in about 1500, and the rubric is a postscript rubric, which reads, I'm reading the 4th line from the bottom, "Dis aufgeschrieben Gebet spricht zum 5 Malen und So jedes Mal, Kuss das Angesicht zum 5 Malen. Did you get that? So kissing it lots. And you can see that the image over here has really taken a lot of human contact, that the face itself is the X that marks the spot, as it were. As with an oscillatory target in a missile, such as this one. And what's interesting about this particular oscillatory target is that it is, of course, the face of Christ. And this is black and white images from one of Jeffrey's books, in which he reproduces, he talks about the face of Christ, and he shows these and quite beaten up images used as oscillatory targets and extremely well worn. So I want to think about how that wear gets there. What is the mechanism by which Philip is wearing this book? The only other folio in his Book of Hours that he is wearing to this degree is the opening folio, which is in extremely bad condition, showing the Virgin Child. But once again, it's an amateur photo that reveals more about the function, the use, the actual physicality, how Philip handled this manuscript. And what you can see here is that there were, again, many rondels stitched into the book, and that this dirt shows that it's been kissed very deliberately, the bottom of the Christ child in particular, which is an odd kind of pattern, because psychologically it seems I see lots of patterns which are that psychologically people are much more attracted to either the feet or the face of a painted figure. But it's possible that he was sewing on Eucharist badges to this page in order to make the body of Christ manifest and present on the image of the baby Jesus. What we can also see from amateur photos is that this leaf has been reinforced. So the binder in 1450 pasted paper to the back of it in order to give it double thickness to allow it, and you can see that the holes go through that. So he's reinforcing it in order to provide a very stiff surface on which to sew in these rondels. And my point here is that Philip's binder anticipated that his boss is going to use this book very physically, and he took measures to ensure that the book would withstand Philip's particular brand of devotion. Now, but it's the face of Christ that Philip really handled most vigorously. And you can recall the Gulbenkian image from yesterday, which shows people eagerly touching the face of Christ, touching the cloth in order to seek miraculous cures. Now, I don't think that he left these brown deposits with his hands, but rather it's quite possible that he is taking the book and pressing it to his face or pressing it to body parts, the way that women would take images of St. Margaret and press it to their abdomens. I get to be pregnant and have a headache here while I'm acting this out with a copy of Ian McEwan. But pressing the book to his body in various ways. But the other thing that you can really see in this picture is that the final very physical act is one of scraping the face down, which is obviously done with some kind of a sharp instrument. So I suspect that Philip, or one of his stewards, is scraping the face with a sharp instrument, something like a scalpel, thereby peeling down the paint of the image and scraping it down to the bare parchment. And in order to use the paint as the body of Christ in something that is the equivalent of a Eucharistic ritual. Now, in fact, that same kind of physical evidence appears in many other images of the face of Christ around the Netherlands. And this one is particularly interesting because it was in a hospital. And it still is in the Hospital of St. John in Bruges, and it's big, and it's now in a lectionary, but I suspect that it was only stuck into that lectionary because it was the only manuscript large enough to house and protect the image, but that originally maybe it hung in a public place. It's on this very thick parchment again. And it's been scraped by many people, I suspect, over time, where that scraping has fanned from the central of the face down to the chin, up to the temple, the medulla oblongata, and possibly as a way of seeking miraculous cures in a hospital context. And again, in this private prayer book, a little French manuscript now in Sadenberg. Have you been to Sadenberg? It's a castle on the Dutch-German border with 200 manuscripts, and you can sleep there. It's fantastic. And this is not iconoclasm, but the ultimate kind of iconophilia. There's no sense that there's iconoclasm directed at the face of Christ here, but rather this is a scraping in order to get closer to extract the body and use it, appropriate it in a different way. Or in this sudarium that Jeff Regan has published, this one on leather. And I suspect that the material here, this leather with very, very thick paint, allows and anticipates this kind of use, this scraping. And again here. So turning back to Philip's books, so it is not just one but two images that he scraped down, either he or his stewards. And he died in 1467 after a very prolonged bout of pneumonia. And he lay in his bed, barely able to breathe. And given that this manuscript in particular is the one that shows all these signs of wear that he spent so much time with, I hypothesize that Philip's steward scraped this book down while the Duke lay dying. And if this hypothesis is correct, then it is possible that amateur artists are making images. The blackface in particular is very simple to make. It involves very little artistry. That the simplicity of the design and the thickness of the paint mean that it is a kind of object that can be made with very little training, but with anticipating this kind of physical use. And in presenting this hypothesis, I'm also thinking of Gary Viking's work on the tokens of Simeon the Stylite sitter, who, according to Simeon's Vita, devotees took objects like this, which is a small half-baked token made of the clay from the ground near his column, with this image of Simeon stamped onto it, crumbled them into water and drank them, and then sought miracles this way, and even gained some miracles according to Simeon's Vita. So part of the efficacy of this object was that it had both status as an image and also as an icon, which of course also describes the face of Christ, which had miracle cures, of course, at the heart of its origin myth, and also close associations with the Eucharist. So is it possible that Philip Stewart placed the paint scrapings on his boss's dying lips and let him ingest the body of Christ? And you can see that he's carefully avoided the eyes in this act of scraping, for that might have constituted some act of iconoclasm. But here is the ultimate act of iconophilia, to love the image so much that you want to take it internally, and to believe in it so thoroughly that you think it might just save your life.
So we have 8 minutes.
Was I really 2 minutes over?
Yes.
Are you going to screen out the weirdos? Oh, yes. Could I?
Yes.
Well, thank you for a really wonderful paper. I enjoyed this very much. And I just wanted to ask you, introduced the term Eucharistic badges, which you also do in the article you very recently published. And as you know, I've studied badges in manuscripts for a very long time while writing my PhD thesis. And one of your arguments to introduce the term Eucharistic wafer badge was, as you showed us, the fact that pilgrims' badges are usually all these different sizes and not just round. And I just wanted you to consider the fact that the badges that are usually sewn into manuscripts are stamped badges and not the cast ones that you showed, the ones that have different shapes and sizes. The cast badges that were also made in pilgrimage sites, as we know from archival sources, are usually round. Every now and then they do have a different size,
Yes.
but they are usually round.
It's true, and the Eloy badge offset
For
is
example,
clearly, and also the ones in
there are many,
77
many, many
58.
examples of round pilgrimage badges.
Yes.
And of course, the latest book would be a suitable place for stamped pilgrimage badges too. So that was just something that I wanted
Yes.
to throw out there. And that's one remark about you said the eyes of your icon being saved, because that would have been kind of iconoclastic.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe there's also this reason that the eyes are very important because of the biblical passage that God should not turn away his face. The gaze is actually important for being saved at the end of time. So I thought
That's
that
a good
might
point, yes.
that
To
might
look
be
into the
one
eyes of
reason
God.
too. So that was just
Thank you for both of those. And thank you, just in general, Hanneke, when I was putting together the article about Eucharist badges, you helped me get data from the database that allowed statistical analysis. And with that, I tried to show that there was a large number of badges that have that are round that can't be associated with a particular site, and yet the round ones are very overrepresented in stitched into manuscripts. And then finally, that the round ones stitched into manuscripts are often cited in the manuscript in next to prayers that have to do with the Eucharist or have to do with the Incarnation. And so I was trying to get at the identity of these things from a statistical and an archaeological and a round and a formal way.
Nigel and then her.
No, I don't have a question.
Really?
I have a point about the so-called obscurity cross, but that's rather irrelevant to your principal argument, so I'm not going to. We can argue about that.
Okay.
I want to make 2 points going in 2 different directions. One I think I made yesterday, and your work absolutely fleshes out in that direction. We have a number of holy faces that served as the pots.
Yes.
And the most important one that I know was in the exhibition, and I recently seen it in the splendid, and I recommend it to you, splendid reinstallation of the treasury of Saint Maurice d'Argonne. So there's a holy face who is absolutely in a pot.
Yes.
So the kissing, and then there's a late 14th century example at the Metropolitan Museum of Art that was also a pot.
Fantastic.
So the kissing idea,
You buy that.
the mouthing, absolutely important, I think, and a theme we should sort of excavate more, tease out a little more. Going in the other direction, it has to do, you said, the curious headdress in one of the in the example. So actually, I referred to it yesterday in the Vengeance. She's described as wearing, Veronica is wearing a turned wimple. And then somehow this takes off as a theme, and by the late 15th, early 16th century, there are many examples where she really, I showed the Frankfurt Master of Flamal, where it's already evident that the attention, there's almost as much attention to her headdress as there is to the cloth she holds. I have no idea what it is. And it's clearly related to contemporary fashion.
Possibly. It seems like it's also related to the headdress that Sibyls wear.
Yes.
The Ethereal Sibyl sometimes.
Good idea. I like that.
Yeah, I like that. So it has something to do with prophecy, retelling.
But again, pay attention, everyone, to that.
Just very quickly, I was very interested in your idea of scraping, and that for me is new. And although I can identify very easily with the idea of kissing an image, I can't. Have you found any textual evidence of like texts that talk about people doing that kind of gesture? Because I can't imagine it. I mean, out of a sort of iconoclastic thing, I can't imagine somebody wanting to scrape an image as a kind of sign of reverence or devotion, something like that. It's an interesting hypothesis because I wonder also how they could have got like that. But what's your, apart from the actual physical thing, but how do you hypothesize that somebody did that?
Yeah, so my evidence is primarily the physical objects themselves,
Yeah.
Which increasingly has been informing how I think
Yeah.
about dirt and deposits.
Yeah,
and
I can
use
see
and
the
functioning
material
and
side of it. Have you
And
found
so
any texts of people
I
talking
have
about?
not found any text, but I bet is that a text right there?
There are
Gervais.
miraculous images, which is great, which are documented.
Oh, very good.
Great.
So that I can think of one in Savona.
You cited the
15.
early Christian style.
Oh yeah, the stylus sitter, so the
That-
entire
Okay.
object.
That's
Yeah.
that's a slightly different formula, isn't it? Where you're given the tablet and told, crumble this in a glass of water and
Yes.
take it. Whereas the example I'm thinking of is one in Savona where there's a painted image on a pillar and people are coming and scraping it and mixing it with water and using it medicinally. And this is an example of a particular image that's acquired.
A couple of years ago, I gave a paper on dirt, which I think is related, and Aidan gave me the title of the paper, which is "Let's Talk Dirty." So you could take that title too. Let's Talk Dirty.
I think I'm sure that you're right about scraping designed to be ingested. I would be cautious about equating it with Eucharistic consumption, because the point of it is to dissolve it in water. And although there's some evidence that people were sometimes given a drink to help them to swallow the host, it can't have been a routine part of Eucharistic reception. So I think the Eucharistic context of it is not as clear as...
Right. Well, I don't know about the water. I was talking about the crumbling.
I'm sure that's how it was
Simeon.
ingested.
But it's difficult to know how paint is ingested. Do you have
Well, it's not to dismiss what Ian's saying, but just simply to remind all of us that, of course, pigments and medicines are both being bought at apothecaries.
That's true.
And so there is a really direct connection
Yeah.
between
That's
these
true.
two substances
Yep.
in the moment.
Thank you.
With regard to your left picture here on the left,
Yes.
would it be fair to think of the canon in the Mass, where in the communicantes there's St. Peter and Paul, and then there's the elevation of the host. So this.
Right. There we go.
And on the other side there would be Nobis quoque peccatoribus, and there are 7 virgins. And so there's a possibility there's mentioned Veronica as well. So you have a gender aspect as well. You have
That's so interesting.
12 apostles, and then you have Cosmos and Damianus and all the others,
Yeah.
and on the other side you have the female, 7 virgins, and maybe Veronica as well. And you have the host in the middle, which is elevated.
That's very ingenious.
That's an idea.
Love it.
Nigel, and this must be the
Well, you
last.
seem to wanted me to make a comment. So I think you're absolutely right that they didn't kiss the Veronica head.
Did everybody hear this?
But we have to look at both kissing and touching.
Yes.
And to distinguish between kissing and touching, what I completely disagree with you is that for the opening of the canon prayer, Te Te Clementissime Pater, with these crucifixions face in the missal that she
The
showed,
take.
and the so-called osculatory cross.
Like this.
I think that was touched and fingered. I think
Yes.
nowadays, really at the beginning of prayer, one very important point, several points, the priest has to make the sign of the cross, but he has to make the sign of the cross 3 times. Hostiam puram, hostiam sanctam, hostiam immaculatam. And I think in the Middle Ages, they actually fingered
Yes.
that cross at the bottom of the facing page, rather than just do it over the offerings,
Yes.
as I think is the
And
practice today.
I think that you're that you're right, but only partially right. Because I think that...
How could they kiss
Because
in the
look at
middle
this.
of the most important central prayer of the Mass
Because-
to interrupt it by kissing the missal? I think it's quite...
It is a bit disruptive, I agree with that. But look at this particular example, because you can see that the priest who kissed the foot of this cross had a beard.
Well, no, I think that repeated fingering from the feet of Christ down onto the cross.
But in the higher resolution, we'll see that it's like a Brillo pad. And unless your finger unless you're holding a Brillo pad, I don't think that you can make this design in the
When
paint.
he did this, I don't know, he must have interrupted the canon prayer, or did it before the canon prayer started, I suppose.
I'm going to allow Michael Lang.
I'm not familiar with those medieval rubrics, but certainly in the Tridentine rubrics there's no kissing of the missal during the canon. Or
There's
the
no
process.
medieval rubrics that say that either.
But I mean, as far as I'm aware, also the signs over the hostia pura are made over the offerings. Certainly, once you have it's after the consecration, you serve the consecrated elements. Maybe you should keep thinking sort of outside the context of the Mass. I mean, there are maybe rituals where there's what I'm thinking of. It has nothing to do with the Middle Ages. There's a modern sort of rite for engagement blessing, where the couple is actually meant to kiss the illustration on the canon page, the cross on the canon page. But that's a modern thing. But I'm sure they got the idea from somewhere. So some rituals outside actually the Mass, where the canon, the page was presented to not just priests, but anyone. Maybe it was. There is some precedent for an engagement blessing to be kissed at that moment.
To brides with moustaches.
And grooms.
I think yes, I think we must draw this discussion to a close. You can see Kate
Very
set many